Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the February 21st, 2024 Worcester Township Board of Supervisors Workshop meeting. Would you please join me in saying the Pledge of Allegiance? Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. My name is Rick DiLello. I'm the chairman of the board. To my left is Lou Betts, who's our vice chair. Steve Quigley, who is our third member, will be here shortly. But as this is just our work session, we are going to get started so that we stay on our schedule, as we have a couple of important items for our 7 o'clock meeting. We want to make sure we honor the time schedule there. So first and foremost, does anybody have any informational items for the board tonight for our work session? Sean?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this meeting is being recorded for future video broadcast. As well, the Board of Supervisors met in executive session on January 24th to discuss litigation, February 1st to discuss personnel, and February 19th to discuss personnel, litigation, and real estate. No decisions were made.
Thank you, Sean. First item on our agenda tonight is public comment. We do ask that you limit your public comment to 5 minutes. Does anybody have any public comment for the board this evening? Carol? So I would ask you to sit down. Please just sign your name in. Make sure that the green light. Pen? Sean, do we got a pen for the? And if you could make sure that there's a green light that's glowing.
Yes.
And pull that towards you and just talk into that so that we get you on the recording.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Carol Otten. I'm here with my husband, Art Bowseret. We live at 1640 Kriebel Mill Road in Worcester. Approximately 1.5 years ago, our neighbor at 1644, Mr. Anthony Tosco, began removing landscaping next to the actual property line. So we used the same landscaper, and the landscaper came in, removed all the trees and bushes on the property line, and then proceeded to enlarge formerly paved, stoned paved driveway by 3 times its size, and brought in 2 or 3 complete dump trucks of stone. I watched this whole process as it took place, and then he began to park vehicles on this driveway. So we became concerned because with all the landscaping, water began to come onto our property, and there was no drainage put in place. So at that point, we contacted the township and worked with Sean Holbom, who's here in the room today. And Sean came out to the property, investigated, yada, yada, so on and so forth, and requested that Mr. Tosco put together an engineering plan and submit it to Worcester Township. When he did not do so, the township then went on to fine him through the magistrate $1,000. And at that point, we've been working with Sean, who upon our last follow-up, basically communicated to us that the township solicitor decided not to take any further action and that this would be a matter for the neighbors to resolve themselves. So at this point, my question would be, if this was a situation that the neighbors should resolve themselves, then first and foremost, why did Worcester Township get involved? Why did you request an engineering plan? And then why did you pursue and fine the neighbor $1,000? That's my first point. My second point is when I put a pool in, which was within the same distance to the property line, I had to secure a permit, which a plan had to be submitted, and then the township requested that we remediate for drainage, which we 100% complied with. So I guess my big question is, why am I being treated differently than my neighbor?
Sure.
And I'd like to know why the solicitor has decided not to continue with the action that you've already taken.
Okay. So you came, just full disclosure, you came up prior to the meeting. We talked briefly about the situation. You provided me with a written document as well, which I've taken a copy of. We'll need to check into some of the specific details of that matter. I don't want to comment to say why we did or didn't do something without getting sort of all of the pieces to it. Certainly, when matters like this happen, we want to make sure, first and foremost, is there a violation that warrants the township action that gets taken? And then ultimately, there is a process that the township will follow. If there was then a determination made by our solicitor that no further action was either required or we didn't have authority to take any further action, we would want to understand why that is so that we can let you know. Ultimately, every situation is a little bit different, so I don't want to speculate with regard to that, but certainly we'll look into it to see if we can determine it, and we'll get back to you to explain either why we can pursue, if there's an additional pursuit we can take, or why we can't ultimately, and then why it would sort of work back to a neighbor-to-neighbor dispute situation. These do get tricky sometimes, in that in a best-case scenario, we want to talk to both sides, and you can just sort of work it out. In many cases, sometimes you can't, and when that happens, you come to find out that we're just not empowered the way sometimes that we would like to be to help with resolution. So,
Okay. Sounds
thank you,
good.
Carol. I appreciate your comments, and
Yes.
we'll be in contact as quickly as we can.
All right, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board tonight? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move to, so this is our workshop session. We're not having any official business, but we're going to have a discussion regarding the Duchy Church. I know we have a few slides in terms of that. I know, Jim, I know we have somebody here from the Historical Society, but we're going to have just a little discussion about that property and sort of, I guess it would be best described as where do we go from here? We know we acquired the property in 2023, and there is some work to be done to it ultimately, and some of that is deciding the best way to go about doing that, and whether we should go to bid, whether we should look for other ways to deal with that, but just start to get a plan together. We wanted to have a workshop session just to sort of start discussing it and sort of get it on our 2024 plan, if you will.
Great. So if you'd like to come up here, I'll try and provide a brief update of where we are now. As Chairman mentioned, we have purchased the Old Duchy Church. The township is now the owner of that property, and staff have been working with the Historical Society to plan ahead for necessary renovations, specifically renovations for new windows, shutters, and doors that would historically match the Old Duchy Church. Staff have been reaching out to contractors to get prices for that work. We're still in the process of getting some of those quotes back, but what we realize at this time is the quotes will almost certainly exceed the legal bidding threshold for municipalities, which means that we will have to post a competitive bid for the work. This could be problematic because the work is very I guess niche, maybe the word, in terms of carpentry. So we are working with other townships to see if we can find any bid specifications that were previously posted for similar projects, and our solicitor to verify that a bidding process will indeed be necessary. But as we prepare for that, we'd also like to take the opportunity to have the Historical Society in here to talk a little bit about the church itself, as well as some other conversations like how do we access the Old Duchy Church. If you've been there recently, you know that parking is somewhat precarious. It is quite close to Route 363. And if the facility is upgraded to the point or updated to the point where it can be, made useful to the community, only a limited number of people could, park there with the existing facilities. So we have some slides with pictures, but Jim Thompson here is a wealth of knowledge for all things historic structures in Worcester. So I will turn it over to him as far as where we go from here.
Thank you. How many people know how many buildings are on the historic register in Worcester?
In Worcester, we have, I think it's 3, if I'm not mistaken. And that's a guess, but I think it's,
It's a loaded question, you already know.
Is that one with a marker on it? I'd say 1.
We're between 1 and 3. We're at 2.
I was close.
Everybody knows Peter Wentz probably is.
Right.
But has anybody heard of the Anthony Morris building?
Anthony Morris?
Bet he
On
has.
Morris Road?
No. It's on Stump Hall Road and Hollow Road. It is the oldest farmhouse or house in Worcester. You've all seen it. It's kind of hidden in the back, but if you would come down Stump Hall Road from Valley Forge, right before you hit Hollow Road, you look to your right, and it sits back in there. This was Spence Haynes' place many years ago. It goes back, wow, a long, long time. And those are the only 2 that have been identified that we can find in Worcester.
So whose property is it actually on? Is it its own lot?
I'm sorry?
Whose property is it on? Is it own parcel of land, or does it belong to another property owner there?
No, it once was a property within 500 acres. But over the years, 1734, 1745, it shrank as they sold off property, particularly across the street. And probably the family that lived there longest was Johannes Bean, and he was there from, I think, 1698 or something until 1740. But beside that, I just wanted to bring to attention that there's only 2. And if you read the 2 documents which have been put in place for both Peter Wentz and the Anthony Morris, it's amazing how they spend, the people who go in to review the building, which you have to do, and the land, they spend a lot of time going over, well, this addition was put on here in 1750, this was that. The Duchy Church, for a car guy, what do you call a car which is in perfect condition but never touched? Green buff, right?
Okay, that's one word, sure.
Among others.
That works, sure.
Yeah. The Duchy Church is that. It's truly, literally, when you walk in the door, if you remove the banister where the minister stood, but he was not the original minister, obviously, you have it. You have the windows are the same. The floors are original. And what is important, I think, is when we go through the process of looking to put it on the National Register, we are really dealing with another type of building which is totally different from the others. And having researched all the others that are in that category, it's really unique. So back to what Sean was saying, 5 years ago at the Historical Society, we went out and got a lot of bids, and we were just not very successful because, as Sean said, this is niche business, these guys who come in and do this. I even hauled in some Amish workers who were working on a home and saying, could you do something here? And maybe they could and maybe they can't. But I think what we're talking about is, if we're looking at, our 300th year anniversary, this is an opportunity that we have to put something of unique value on the National Register. Recall that it does have its geodetic sticker on the side that was put there in 1942 by the Coast Guard to indicate the elevation and the longitude and latitude of the building. Those things don't exist anymore. And again, if the work that would go into this is I don't know. We have to figure out what do we want in the end. And as we always discussed at the Historical Society, the ideal thing would be to connect that with Hebner Park somehow, so that people could walk over, see it, and then leave. But certainly, as Sean pointed out, whenever we didn't have open houses anymore there because we had to hire the fire company to direct traffic because it was so dangerous getting in and out of the thing. So, but that's because it's not really paved or anything either.
Well, I think there's a couple things, Jim, maybe you could comment on it a little bit. One was the thought process that if you can create a trail system to Hebner Park. There are some properties, I know we've done some initial outreach in that regard, but that would be a long-range thinking that that becomes your access point, that you use Hebner Park as a parking sort of location, and then you're using a trail connectivity to get yourself, so that you're not, the front doesn't really allow for a lot of parking in terms of that. But I think the other element is, you also sort of open up a can of worms when you go to the National Registry, that what do we take on with that? I mean, I know I was on a historic committee we had in 2005 and 6, where we were looking at Worcester, and what do you feel about, so if you go to the National Register, what comes with that? I mean, there's some cachet to sort of have this historic property to us, but are there other things that we need to consider in terms of what requirements may come in terms of maintaining the property and what we might need to do there if we decide that's the right path to pursue?
Well, the building as it stands right now, the inside is in pretty good shape.
Right,
The outside could use some plaster here and there, but the roof was put on in 2006. The new chimney was 2006. A lot of work was done in 2006. The key, I think, is, the sun does a lot of damage to the windows and things like that.
right,
If just as forward thinking, regardless of whether we decide to put it on the National Register or not, you can't, if we're going to replace the windows, we would want to put them as authentic as possible, but, not to the extreme where, you have to find wood from 200 years ago and things like that.
right,
That would fall within the framework of the National Register. The reason I brought up the Anthony Mars house and everything, the people, when they went through that, I mean, they spent an incredible amount of time. Again, ours is pretty much unique and wouldn't probably take that.
right. Well, Steve, I'll ask you a question, because I think you probably know it far better than I, but I think about the Kibble House, and when it predates my time on the board, but I know there was a lot of restoration work you did, and I remember a lot of conversations and dollars on the windows in particular. So you talk about the windows. I know that we went through a process of restoration on that property. It was just more work than you envisioned. At the end of the day, it winds up being a bigger project than just.
But there's only 10 windows.
Only 10. That's reassuring.
I guess my first question, Rick, before we start spending a lot of money, not a problem preserving this, is such an interest in the building from your love of the building. Why were never contacted before it was opened up to go to the real estate market? I know a vet was interested. Some people were interested in a home, and I know they'll do a good job maybe keeping it the way it was, but I was surprised that we were unaware of it till we saw the real estate sign up in front of the building for sale. And I don't know, it was just poor communication with the supervisors where the breakdown was, that, we found out from driving past it on a Saturday that the building was up for sale. Rather than coming to the township and trying to help you over that hurdle, I know volunteers, and you're stuck with a small committee sometimes. A lot of the older people in Worcester that had an interest in that are probably no longer here. So I guess there's a lot of variables, but that's, I guess, the item that I have a problem with, before I start spending a lot of money on this. And I know it's not cheap. I live in a house from the late 1700s, and the only thing I do is spend money, and by the time I get it fixed, I have to redo it. It's just, it's endless. But I think it is a building that's worth saving, and that's why it was a no-brainer for the supervisors to do it. But now we have the added cost, and we're working on, as Rick alluded to, trying to find a way to get from point A to point B. If we have to condemn a neighbor's house or something, we talked about that that's a possibility, for parking for the place. That's something there. But I guess a question as far as parking, when you had an event, Jim, where'd you park the cars? I know the police were there directing traffic, but you can only get, at the most, 4 cars on at a time. If Robbie Rothenberger parked his truck there, you only get 1.
No, you at that time, now we haven't done this in 10 years, But at that time, there were trees that were not encroaching like they are now and things like that. We could hold 10 in there, but the way we did it for tours, for the Saturday tours, when we would open, the whole township would be visited, and it would be $20 a car, then you'd have a lot of people get in
Oh,
the
a
same
car.
car. But that was the idea of not having too many cars.
You'd sort of encourage some ride-sharing activity in terms of the,
That's why it was $10 a car.
Well, I think the board certainly sees the potential for the building. There's something you do that, you know, once it's gone, it's gone. And I'm enlightened by the fact the other property, I have to go check it out now. Can you see it from the road? The other house on Stump Hall Road?
I beg your pardon?
Can you see the house from the road on Stump Hall Road?
And now's the time of year to see it.
Okay.
Because again, you just go down Stump Hall, right before you hit the hollow, it's on your right. And it's in the Worcester book. Just,
Was that part of it? Mrs. Schierenbach owned that
no, she's a little further down.
further down? Okay, the next property probably down.
But it's in there's a whole write-up in the Worcester book.
Okay.
I forget the page number, but look up Spence Haynes. And that's where you'll find it.
Okay.
but I'll say I like the notion when you talk about sort of tying it to the 300, which gives you a little time. You know, it's not an outlay tomorrow. Part of the open space plan was looking at, 300 by 2030, sort of the idea of aligning to the 300 anniversary on some of the open space acquisitions, that you're doing it across a decade. You're not doing it across, 10 weeks. And some of the, you start thinking in terms of just a little longer planning, but that gives you some runway to work with in terms of how you might take a look at it, how you might want to consider it. Now, do you have, I'd be curious to know, I guess Sean is starting to find out that it's really a niche, it's a very niche sort of skill set in terms of that, and that just makes things interesting as well, that you don't just put it out to bid tomorrow and you get 20 people.
Sean, have you heard back from the stuff we gave you there?
So some of those were quotes from Pella, for prefab windows that would not comply with standards set by the National Registrar. So if we are pursuing, historic registration for the building, the cost of the work will certainly increase because it will have to be reflective of that time and era. As I mentioned, the other complication with that is the bidding threshold. So, how do we bid work specifically for historic restoration carpentry? I'm not exactly sure of at this time, but we do have a few photos here that show the existing state of it. This is the front-facing 363.
Right.
The side facing southbound towards Lower Providence, the side facing northbound towards the township building, interior facing the cemetery, interior facing north, interior facing south, and the front entrance of the Old Duchy Church. I actually counted 9 windows in total. Yeah, I thought that was counted in my 9.
I thought it was 9. I thought it was 10, but
Yeah, I could be wrong. And then this is the backyard facing towards Hebner Park,
Right.
as well as an aerial. So you see the Old Duchy Church here, Hebner Road. This is approximately 500 yards as the crow flies. And as was mentioned earlier, if there's any sort of trail connectivity, we would have to speak with 4 property owners in this area and our engineer to discuss how feasible that idea is, what the cost is, and what sort of grant revenue might be available to assist.
Gentlemen, a question, I guess a comment. 3 years ago, once again, you could only take so many old windows in your house at one time. When the wind blows, the cold air comes in. We replaced a lot of our windows, and we got rid of some of them. I'm sure there's a lot of homes in Worcester are probably doing the same thing, updating it with the new Pella windows. And maybe some of these windows are available. Once again, My home was late 1700s, early 1800s. It had nice wavy glass, but we got rid of them. We got the new modern windows like everybody else. So I think if we could put a note somewhere in one of our newsletters to the people that read that, hey, we're looking for old windows from old homes in the township, it may save some money, because if you go to Lancaster and get them reproduced or something, certainly these windows from the early 1800s, that windows may be available. There's not that many of them. Certainly, I get rid of that many from my house. I must have got rid of 16 windows in a house. That's 32 pair.
I did the same. But the glass actually, with one exception, is fine. It's just a matter of rebuilding the sash and things around it.
Yeah, and once again, there's plenty of people that recycle old wood in Lancaster. There's a lot of people that do sashes and things. We get a lot of barn windows made at the farm.
Right.
It's new wood, but those guys are out there in Lancaster. But manager, question for you. When we got on bids on this, is that different than going out for a regular bid and looking at windows versus old windows? How's that, the bid process work for that?
We don't anticipate it to be an exception from the bidding process. How we specify the bids to qualify a responsible bidder is something the solicitor and I will have to discuss. And as I mentioned, we're looking for comparable bids from other townships that have endeavored in similar projects. So far, we've found none, however, so we're still reaching out for that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, certainly it's a good idea to communicate it in the newsletter and sort of get, start getting a ball rolling to communicate that, we're looking for ideas, we're looking for plans, we're looking for insight, and we may find somebody that has information out there, a connection point, somebody who has old wood or old windows or old sash or old something that might make it more amenable. I think one of the other things, Sean, that will be helpful for the board is just maybe a little more understanding on the National Registrar, sort of what that would mean for us, what sort of threshold that would put for us, and what, so we can weigh that. I like the cachet of it. I mean, I like the notion of, having a very limited number of historic properties, and you're one of them. I mean, I think there's something attractive to that, but just understanding what burden that adds to the process.
I will put something together.
Sean, as I'm thinking about it, my daughter used to live in the old blacksmith house right before Meadowood, which Larry Smith owned before my daughter purchased from them. And in the garage on the second floor, they had a lot of old windows from the original house, and the house is early 1800s house, and maybe the windows are still up there in the old Smith garage next to Meadowood that the EMS people use now.
Again, I don't think the issue is finding old windows.
Right.
It's just finding, I can tell you in 1976, Dick Schaefer and my father rebuilt all those windows.
Right.
But they were both carpenters. And I mean, frankly, if you find two people like that, I mean, maybe good luck, but that's what it took. The glass is fine.
Right. Well, we won't know if we don't ask. We'll put it out there and start asking, and somebody will know somebody who will know somebody, and eventually it'll work its way down the line. I mean, I think that's certainly a path to follow in terms of that.
I think we could find out, though. I think I gave you 6 names of people that did this before, and we got rid of 2 right away because it was Pella and Anderson. But
Yep.
those 4 people, it took a long time to find them.
Yeah, and we've spoken with some of them who have told us they will not endeavor into a competitive bid process because they are unfamiliar with it or don't see a light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, with their fee or expertise. So again, we're still waiting for some of the others to respond, and we're hopeful that we get a good number of qualified responses. But time will tell.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? Hold on. So we'll have a public comment period if you want to add a comment. We don't sort of take it to the audience specifically, but I think, do you have any other questions? I think I want to also be respectful of our 7 o'clock timetable. Jim, I certainly appreciate you coming and sharing some thoughts, and And I mean, just getting us talking about it is a starting point. You know, how sometimes that's the hardest part in terms of that.
I'll just add that Jim and I and the Historical Society are having ongoing conversations, so we'll keep you abreast of our progress and conversations.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Jim. So I will ask if anybody has any public comment. Now, we're still in our work session, but if anybody has any public comments, or if you have a comment you want to make relative to that, this would be the time you would come forward. You tell us who you are, and you can share your public comment. Yeah, you'll sign right there, and then tell us who you are, and then share your comment.
My name's Christopher DePaul,
Okay, Chris?
and I have a property over at 1616 Whitehall. Just in reference to some of the discussions about that, the Philadelphia Historical Society has a list of vendors that do this. A friend of mine actually makes windows for the buildings down there, for the historical ones, for different properties. And with that, as Sean had said, I think just knowing a lot about the public bidding process, from the sound of this, this is going to get into the prevailing wage. And there is a bunch of historical companies, you know, that do preservation and all, that you can go to for a lot of this, that I've, you know, worked with down in buildings in the city through my time. I just wanted to pass it on. I can give you the information. And,
Appreciate that.
okay.
Thank you, Chris. We appreciate your public comment. Does anybody else have any public comment for the board relative to our work session? Seeing none, then motion to adjourn. So moved. Folks, we'll just take a couple minutes and then we'll get started with the business meeting.